This week, we flash back to 2011 for part 2 of the 2-review series called Justifiable Homicide, in which we discuss comics about murdering a murderer. This week's topic is Monster by Naoki Urasawa. Set in Germany, the series focuses on the unintended consequences of Dr. Kenzo Tenma's good deed. He saved the life of a boy who turned out to be a remorseless killer. Guest reviewer Natalie Nourigat joins me to discuss. This episode was originally published on August 22, 2011. We hope you'll spread the word about deconstructing comics. Tell your friends about us, share episodes on social media, and also send us suggestions for topics we could cover. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Joining me now from Portland, Oregon, it's the lovely, the talented Natalie Nourigat. Yay. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Sure. So we're going to talk about Monster by Naoki Urasawa, which, yes, is Japanese manga comics. And so it's set in Germany, starts out in Dusseldorf. They move around Germany and they end up in the Czech Republic part of the time. And it's just like we're in a Hollywood movie. If it's set in another country, the main character is an American. So here it's set in Europe, but the main character is Japanese. And his name is Kenzo Tenma, and he's a neurosurgeon. And feel free to jump in if I miss anything here, Natalie. But he gets caught up in hospital politics, and when he writes a paper or does a great surgery or something, the director gets credit for it. But he's dating the director's daughter, Ava. And so he's kind of like, yeah, okay, well, whatever. And I won't make too much of it. But then one day he gets pulled off of surgery of a Turkish day laborer to work on a famous opera singer instead. This hospital's really caught up in politics and things other than taking care of patients.
Yep.
Yeah. So he saves the life of the opera singer, but the Turkish man dies, and his wife and son are demanding to know why he didn't go ahead and operate on the Turkish man. And he talks about this with Ava, and she says, after all, people's lives aren't created equal. And this really bothers him. This is kind of like the first really big point that Urasawa makes in the story.
You wonder how he's gone this far in the relationship with her, because they seem to be so different.
Yeah, they're not really made for each other. So then, meanwhile, so this is 1986. So East Germany is still there, and a government official from East Germany and his family defect to West Germany, and then they have twins, a boy and a girl, and one night the couple are shot dead, and the son is seriously wounded, and the twin sister is traumatized, and they're brought to the hospital, and Tenma is prepping to operate on this boy who was shot in the head, and then the mayor is brought in with a heart condition or something, cerebral blood clot. There we go. I knew it was in my notes somewhere. And he's told to operate on the mayor, but after the last experience he had, he disobeys orders and operates on the boy, and the mayor dies, and the boy survives. But Tenma is called selfish. He loses his position as head of neurosurgery. Ava dumps him. He's lost everything to save this boy. And then a little later, the director and 2 other administrators are found dead from poison, and Tenma becomes the chief suspect. And the twins disappear. And then we come back 9 years later. Tenma's been appointed chief of surgery by the new administration, and he stays in that position 9 years. And then And he still feels like when he operated on Johann and saved this boy's life, it reestablished his priorities as a doctor. It was a really great thing for him to do. But then it turns out that Johann has been basically killing people.
Awesome.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, which is awesome.
How is that awesome?
That he caused it. Like, that would be the worst realization.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what drives the whole book, the unintended consequences of saving Johann. He's been going around...
Yes.
Basically, he gets into foster home situations, and then he kills his foster parents.
Yep.
And you get to the point where every time you see a middle-aged or elderly couple, you think, oh no, they're going to bite it too.
You're too happy. No.
Although they don't always die, but you're always afraid they're going to.
Yes.
And then he meets Johann again in a parking garage and sees Johann kill this guy who he had hired to do whatever, I don't remember right now. But Tenma is accused of that murder. And so then he's on the run, and he's carrying a gun, vowing that he's going to kill Johann and undo the not exactly undo, but prevent any further killings from the deed that he did, saving Johann's life. So that's then we're kind of at the premise of the rest of the series, where Tenma's on the run with a gun and after Johann, and then some more secrets come out as it goes on. But I was interested thinking about why is it set in Germany, and so much about the fall of communism in it, kind of as a backdrop. Any thoughts on that?
I don't know if I'm going to be any help there. I was born in 1987, and history was my worst topic in school. I was just trying to keep up with the story for the most part, and I couldn't point out on a map any of the cities that these things are happening in. But it was still interesting to have them be a part of the story, and have all of this political upheaval and conspiracy theories weaved in with history. How about for you?
Well, a little bit that gets into the ending, which we're going to do later after we do a spoiler alert.
Okay.
So, and maybe come back to that point. But we can talk about 511 Kinderheim, which is revealed about volume 5-ish, I think. There are 18 volumes total. But 511 Kinderheim was an orphanage where some experiments were done, and I think they were well, the way it's presented anyway. The children were trying to sort of what were they trying to do? Like get rid of their morals, kind of. Yeah,
they were trying to make dictators, right, or soldiers. So they were, trying to make them turn on each other. Mm-hmm.
Although, well, or at least what 511 Kinderheim ended because Johann kind of took control of it, and everyone killed everybody else, all the children and the directors. So a little bit it raises the question: was Kinderheim really responsible for that, or was it something more innate in Johann? Maybe 511 Kinderheim wasn't the main problem with him.
Do you remember, what was he like before he went there? I mean, I'm going to try and avoid spoilers, but in the end, I think we see a younger Johann than when he's at school there, right? And he's already kind of creepy.
I'm not sure if we ever really see much. Well, we see a little bit, like in the middle. I think I get a little lost on the continuity because there's so much going back in time in the story to different points, and
it's a big, complicated story.
Yeah, the bit with the Red Rose Mansion I think happens before Johann is in 511 Kinderheim.
Yes.
And it seems like that is more what's driving Johann's kind of thinking than Kinderheim, maybe.
That's what Nina thinks. She blames herself for that, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's totally reasonable to think that Kinderheim was not the catalyst for Johann.
Mm-hmm. And Nina is also known as Anna, who is the twin sister.
Right.
And yeah, when it comes back 9 years later, she has changed from Anna to Nina, and she's with an adoptive, or almost adoptive couple. And she doesn't remember any of that. She doesn't remember anything really before they took her in. It's all been kind of blotted out of her memory. Such a terrible memory. But then when it's kind of brought back for her, because Johann comes back on her 20th birthday and kills her foster parents. Happy birthday!
Yeah.
Because he thinks he's coming back for her. But then she also wants to kill him. She doesn't want Tenma to kill him. She doesn't want him to get in trouble for it. She wants to do it because she also blames herself.
Yeah. She feels like she's tainted already because she doesn't have this perfect, flawless past, and she doesn't want Tenma to become a killer.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's not too much of a spoiler. It comes out fairly early that she had shot Johann as a boy at his request after he killed their foster parents.
Yeah.
And because it seems like as much as he seems to want to kill people just to kind of shake things up, or they use the analogy of disrupting a line of ants several times, just to kind of mess with people's minds. He'll kill people. As much as he tends to want to do that, he seems to want to die. He seems to just want to be no more.
Yes. There's a kind of a split personality dynamic, right? He's fighting himself. He knows that there's an evil side of him.
Yeah, well, early on they suggest that he has a split personality, but then Urasawa never really comes back to that explicitly. Although there are a lot of things in there which he never gets very explicit about, and you really kind of have to read between the lines a lot of the time, I think.
Yeah, I'm really curious how much of it was completely written out before he started, and whether or not he needed to extend the series suddenly and had to bring back things that he had dropped.
Yeah, I don't know. I know sometimes with manga, the editors will say, keep going, don't end it yet, because we're making money on this, keep going.
Yeah, it's tough when you're reading it collected 10 years later and you want it to be this smooth story.
Yeah. So, yeah, we're never quite sure about the split personality thing, perhaps. Now, I noticed there are several points in the story where there's a big disaster that's either... What's going on there?
I'm sorry. I'm trying to find a place to sit in Periscope, and I picked the hallway, which was dumb.
I see. So you're in Periscope Studios now, huh?
Yes.
Okay.
I could go to the computer room, but then you would get an unearthly hum in the background.
I see. Okay, so anyway, there are several kind of disasters in the story that are either planned by Johann or by people who want to bring him into their organization, like early on that Turkish Quarter business.
Yeah.
And I noticed that Tenma is never able to stop these. He can sort of lessen the damage, he can ameliorate them, but he can't prevent them. And it's the same as when he was a doctor, because he's always, as a doctor, you're coming in to lessen the damage of something that's already happened. But yeah, to prevent that is much harder. And yeah, he's never able to do it in the story, which is, in a way, it's sort of disappointing if you're coming at it as being a thriller, because you want the hero to come in and completely prevent something. that's going to happen. But it doesn't happen in this story.
I mean, he saves lives, but so often he'll be in a situation where, despite his best efforts, somebody gets shot in the chest, and he has to deal with them dying or barely living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems like there get to be so many scenes where a fairly important character dies or a supporting character dies, and he's just either saving them or failing to, it's too late to save them maybe, but he can't ever seem to prevent the problems. And I think that's kind of part of Urasawa's point is we can't always, we can't really prevent bad things from happening. We just have to kind of deal with them and lessen the damage as much as we can, maybe. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of points in here where there's a positive message, like don't give up and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I generally don't like horror or anything that's fatalistic or I don't know, people hurting other people. Mm-hmm. But I can read Urasawa and I really enjoy him because he has all of these heartwarming side stories and this undertone, even with something as dark as Monster, where there's actually optimism underneath it all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely true.
Go
ahead.
The whole plot thread with Dieter and Tenma's relationship I thought was so sweet.
Yeah, Dieter is a young boy who Tenma basically rescues from a guy who is sort of his foster dad, but is hurting him often. Mm-hmm. And then Dieter continues to appear through the rest of the series. And we had both Dieter and Nina. They always want to see Tenma. They really like Tenma, and Tenma will be gone for a long time. But they're always, I get to see Tenma again. Yes.
Yeah.
There's a whole theme through the series about names. Names keep brought up again and again in ways that don't really ring true sometimes as things that people would actually say. So it's clear that he's trying to make a point about names that may be symbolic of identity. I don't know. They're brought up a lot, but I was still a little unclear at the end what the idea actually was there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the twins are born without names, and the mother really, really wants them to have names, but they aren't given them. Mm-hmm. If they were created for an evil purpose, if they're supposed to be, the seeds of destruction, then maybe it makes them more anonymous. Like, it could be anyone. They're not they don't have a name that comes from their country or determines their gender or anything. They could be anyone.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, some of the quotes I wrote down from the story, often it's seen as a negative thing to lose your name. Like, my name is proof of my existence, someone says. Mm-hmm. But then, we haven't talked about the picture books yet. But someone who was in 511 Kinderheim says, this is volume 15, he says when he read these picture books, it was a freeing experience, and he said, you don't even need your own name anymore. That's true freedom. So, names are seen as something necessary, something you want to have, and it's part of your identity, but then also sort of, if you don't have it, it could be freeing, because maybe you don't need an identity, or you can find a different one.
Do you think it has to do with responsibility? Like, you're held responsible for the things that you do under your name, but if you don't have one, there are no rules?
That could be. Yeah. And there are a lot of characters in here who are either they don't know their real name, or they've gone by an alias, or the author of the picture books has many pen names. It's also interesting. aspect. I mean, if they, I suppose, yeah, that fits with what you were saying. Maybe if you change to a different name, then yeah, you don't have responsibility for the things you did under the first name.
Yeah, or you can have a fresh start, like Johan with the foster parents, the names, and a little bit of cross-dressing. Maybe that's all an attempt to create something new.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, let's come back to that.
It's complicated.
Yeah. After the spoiler warning, I want to get into that a little more.
Okay.
Yeah, so I noticed there were several arcs, especially kind of early on, that were seemed to be trying to establish that Johan's approach is different from other murderers because he's so cold and there's no emotion in his murder. Like, there's a case where there's a murder that turns out to be a copycat murder, where they find both Tenma and the inspector Lunge notice that that murder scene has emotion in it, so they know that it couldn't have been Johan. And although it's interesting that, Lunge, we haven't talked about him yet.
He's really interesting.
Yeah. He thinks Tenma has a split personality as Johan. He doesn't believe that Johan is a separate person. And he thinks that coldness in Johan's murders proves that it's Tenma because as a doctor, as a surgeon, he's been around death so much that he thinks it would make him completely lose feeling for seeing people die. Although Tenma says it's just the opposite, because going into a surgery, he was never calm because he was always afraid he would make a mistake. So, yeah, I guess the point there being, even as a surgeon who's around death all the time, it never, if you have that basic humanity, it never becomes something kind of normal or something you can ignore.
I agree.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Lunge a little bit. He's not exactly. He's kind of cold in his own right, where he can kind of shut out his emotion or care. Even, his family ends up dumping him because he's just, he doesn't pay any attention to them. He gets so caught up in his work. And
he has no, emotional relapse from that. He's just on with business.
And he's got this method of remembering things where you see him moving the fingers of one hand where he's kind of typing something into the hard drive on his brain.
Yes, that's there forever, and he can pull up at a moment's notice.
Right, yeah, then when he needs to pull up that data, then he's moving his fingers again, and he's just kind of reciting it out. Now, the psychiatrist, and I wrote that, Dr. Gillen, points out that, or at least it appears to him that Lunge's way of recording this information is subjective. And he can kind of, as opposed to like tape recording something, which would be more objective, but it's being stored in his brain. It's possible for him to sort of alter it. I don't know that he actually does. I mean, he has this subjective idea that Tenma is the killer, but he seems to record that information fairly objectively. I don't know.
Yeah. He does seem to want to prove himself right, though, especially after he has that fallout where he loses his family and is taken off of the case. He's even more dedicated to proving that he's right. But I seem to recall that when he's shown evidence that it's not Tenma, he's equally willing to accept the truth.
Eventually, although it seems like early on there are some places where he's presented fairly clear evidence and he doesn't accept it. Eventually he does, and even though he hasn't admitted it, it's fairly clear about halfway through that he's starting to accept that it's not Tenma. And he does some of the investigation on all this backstory on Johann and 511 Kinderheim and Red Rose Mansion killings and all of that. Yeah, well, just to explain a little bit, the Red Rose Mansion, well, let's talk about that later, because that gets into a big spoiler. So let's talk about that afterwards. Okay. Yeah, well, let's get into a little bit on Urasawa's techniques. He brings in a lot of symbolism. Often, like, to make the point that he's trying to make, where, like, Volume 4, when Nina is talking to, I didn't write down who it was, but the guy is saying, like, we need Johann to lead us. I think this is the neo-Nazi group.
Okay.
And they think, that Johann would be a good leader for them. They're pretty wrong, but he'd probably end up killing them. But then this guy, he stacks this fruit. I don't know what kind of fruit it was. Kind of a weird fruit, but
the table, right?
Yeah, when he's got Anna at that dinner table, or Nina.
Yeah.
And he stacks that fruit so that there's one higher than the others, as he's saying, we need him to lead us. It's kind of this visual thing, kind of reinforcing the point. And he does that fairly often, I think. He's also got that line about the line of ants. I think there is a point, where we actually see ants, a line of ants. But it's mentioned a number of times. Johann likes to destroy or disrupt the line of ants just to toy with people.
Mm-hmm. I love that comics can do that. It's not like, it's not in words, the metaphor. It's something that you might not even pick up on if you're reading too quickly, but it's there if you see it.
Yeah, well, there's a good example of that in Volume 16, where there really isn't anything stated. It's the paper airplane.
Yes.
The people Tenma is staying with, there's some kids, and they're trying to throw a paper airplane out of the window and get it to fly well. And they get it. Tenma gets one going, and it's this kind of lesson about, don't give up, or whatever. But then you see on the next page, the airplane lands in this construction site and just gets kind of buried. I thought, like, wow, but he didn't give up and he succeeded, but in the end, he kind of failed. It's kind of like, even if you succeed, it's not going to last, maybe.
Sad.
So, that's kind of a harsh point.
That was one of the sadder arcs. All of those, they were immigrants and orphan children, right? And they were all living together in the house?
Right. Yeah,
the alternative family situation that Tenma was in for a little while. Mm-hmm. But that was a sad arc. Yeah.
Especially when you find out why they're all living together, and that's kind of a spoiler that I'm not going to go for, but yeah. But there are so many supporting characters throughout the story some of them are just brought up for one arc and then they're gone. But he's really good at making us care about them right from there, almost from the minute they appear.
Yes. I would say that's one of Urasawa's greatest strengths, is bringing in a character and making you care about them in 2 pages. Mm-hmm. It's insane. And so many of them, it's not like it gets old. Even in the 16th and 17th volumes, when new characters were showing up, you felt like you wanted them to succeed. You didn't want to see something bad happen to them.
Yeah. Well, in some cases, he'll make you care about somebody after something bad has already happened to them. Remember the guy, this is kind of late in the series, but the guy who picks the plums,
No. Who's that?
This is in the village, that's at the end of the last arc.
Yes.
Just as we're first introduced to that village, there's the guy who picks the plums and is killed. And then as we see who he is, we see where he is, then there's this discussion back at the hotel about the guy who picks the jam, and here's his picture, and he wanted everybody to enjoy his jam.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, wow. But he's already dead, so.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's much of a spoiler, but it's just, it's just a good example of how Urasawa makes you care about the characters.
And I like how they all care about each other. You can see just in really small interactions how much somebody meant to the rest of the plot, the rest of the cast.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, is this a spoiler? I think I'm going to wait and save that for later, too. But it's interesting that, Tenma and the main characters will disappear for quite a while sometimes. There's that long stretch from about the middle of Volume 6 to late Volume 7, where it's all Carl and Lotte and Mr. Schuwald in Munich, and the main characters are not around.
Right.
It's like a different comic there for a while.
But you already feel like you know them well enough that they can carry the story while they have to. Mm-hmm. It's really good storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Although I found one reviewer online who was like, remember when Dr. Tenma was the main character? And I think he still is. I don't know that it dilutes it that much to have all these other characters focused on for a while. Wouldn't it get
boring 18 volumes of the same narrative voice?
Yeah, I think so. I think it didn't really hurt it for me. I was kind of amazed that he could, get rid of all the main characters for a while and still keep us interested.
Right.
Now, on the other hand, it served the story, but I became a little, I'm not sure what the right word is, but it seemed like almost every new character who was brought in somehow, by some coincidence, tied back into Johann or 511 Kinderheim. It's like, how does he happen to keep meeting these people who were either in Kinderheim or they knew somebody who was there or they've met Johann at some point? Or...
They all have a very bold tattoo on their face. You can spot them on the street. I don't know. Everyone that he meets is really interesting and at this pivotal point in their life. It's so coincidental.
Mm. Well, and in any serialized fiction, coincidence is often used, but I think you have to be careful not to make it get ridiculous. I think Urasawa comes pretty close to that sometimes.
Yeah, I don't mean to mock it. It is used well for the most part, but yeah, it is kind of crazy how every single thread ties back to the main plot somehow, even if it's revealed much later.
More of our discussion of Monster coming up. But first, a reminder to join us for 20th Century TV and music trivia quiz videos and more on our Patreon page. Patrons donating $4 a month or more get access to our podcasts on the first 50 issues of The Amazing Spider-Man and our new series on Captain Marvel as rendered by Jim Starlin. But the only way to hear the podcasts is to join us at patreon.com/deconcomics for at least $4 a month. We look forward to hearing from you.
I crave superheroic content. Let's see what's on.
I want you to tell all your friends about me.
What are you?
I'm Batman.
Nah, don't think so.
I'm Batman.
Not really what I'm looking for.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman!
Ugh, absolutely not.
This is Robin the Boy Wonder. I'm Batman.
Aha, now that's more like it.
If you see Adam West as the one true Batman, then this is the podcast for you. Tune in on your favorite podcast source to hear Tim and Paul discuss the 1966 series and everything connected with it. What's the podcast called?
To the bat poles. To the bat poles. To the bat poles.
Sometimes he introduces a new story point in a kind of a subtle way. The storybooks we still haven't really talked about, the picture books. They're first mentioned, I noticed on the second reading, that they're first mentioned in Volume 8, when Lunge meets those Japanese businessmen, which is kind of an interesting point in itself because the author is Japanese, and he's showing these Japanese businessmen in kind of a stereotypical way.
Yes, it's the same in Pluto. It's so weird. He's acting as if he's an outsider who's ashamed of Japan or something. I don't understand.
But in that scene, I think when they're at karaoke, of all things, there's the first mention of the Czech storybook. I think one of the Japanese businessmen has been in the Czech Republic and was asked to bring back one of these books. But we don't actually see it there, and it's kind of a point that if you're not looking for it, you'll miss it. But I thought, I don't know, if maybe... I think I would have maybe tried to hit that harder because, it's a serialized story in its original form, and I'm not sure if the reader is going to remember it the way that it was presented there.
A year later, whenever they're actually hearing about it again.
Because we don't even actually see the book in that scene. It's just mentioned. I think it's maybe in a package or something, but...
I feel like when Urasawa brings back a plot point, he does go to lengths to at least catch you up enough that you can follow what's happening. But I was telling you earlier, I read this series 6 months ago, and I had to go to a bookstore just before we talked and remind myself what happened because it's so complicated. I can't imagine reading this real time as it was published and trying to remember what all had happened. Right, yeah, because a lot of the important points about what happened in the past are made just once. And then it's never reinforced. So I think it's kind of hard to get to the end and keep it all in your mind. Yeah. You basically have to take notes, I think. Actually, I think the storybook plotline is one of the things that I remember the least about the series. Were there two different series of children's books? Like there were two different art styles? Well, there were quite a few of these books. I think the last one that's revealed to us is done in a different style. Well, it's pointed out. So, okay, the author. Well, geez, they're thinking of him as being Franz Bonaparte with a lot of other pseudonyms. But he did books in these various pen names. But then it gets to a point where, and these books were used in some way to I don't know, indoctrinate the kids in 511 Kinderheim. But then it reaches a point where they just become normal children's books, and I think someone says that the illustration style gets worse, or it's like less interesting or something. I don't know, the ones that we actually see in the book, I think, are all in the same style. Although Urasawa is really good at switching styles. The style of the children's books looks quite different from the more realistic style of the rest of the comic. Well, yes. and then in the series he's got going on now, Billy Bat, which I think has not been officially published yet in English. No. We're still getting 20th Century Boys coming up. Wow. But that's the premise of that is partially that there's this comic strip, funny animal comic strip that one of the characters is doing, and that's a completely different style. Cool. So yeah, he's really good at switching up styles. And the children's book, well, we see one of them, actually, I forget which volume it's in now, but there are several pages where we see that book and it's printed in a sepia ink rather than the black and white, so it really distinguishes it from the rest of the book. Cool.
But yeah, then those children's books are a little, well, they're meant to be a little creepy.
Yeah. I remember the monster being legitimately creepy when he got a full page panel, with the pointy teeth and everything. Even though it's so simplistic, it was creepy.
Yeah, well, and then this, I don't remember which volume it's in. That didn't get into my notes, but where the monster is like eating people, and they make it kind of a cutesy thing, like munch munch gobble gobble gulp or something.
Yeah.
that is pretty creepy. So yeah,
and the whole point of that was it ties back into the name thing, right? Because he's looking for a name, and he takes other people's, but it doesn't satisfy him.
Yeah, or then he eventually loses that identity and he appears as the monster again, and he has to get inside someone else and eat their insides and become them, but then that identity disappears again.
Right.
And then finally, at the end, he becomes Johann, but then nobody else is around to know who Johann is.
Yeah.
And I think what was revealed is that actually the boy Johann was named after the character in the book, rather than the other way around.
Okay. You mean after he's given a foster parent?
Right, yeah, I think...
the Liebermans?
I think the first couple who meet him, maybe? I don't remember so much there. But yeah, somebody at some point finds the book, and names him after that. Although you see the book, and that Johann looks similar to the real Johann.
Well, okay. Wasn't the illustrator knew him as a baby and would draw him, right?
Right.
He was a source of inspiration, but it's just this weird coincidence that he ties back into the book through someone else.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think I think it wasn't Bonaparte who actually gave him that name. Because yeah, you mentioned that the twins were the mother was not allowed to give them names, and they were part of this experiment. Which I don't know. For me, I didn't feel like it was ever clear enough what actually happened with them.
Why were they being raised like that? They were supposed to be part of some sort of breeding program to make good children, but then they were taken away from their mother and drawn by a creepy children's book artist. I don't understand.
Yeah, it didn't seem to be something about making them super soldiers or something. It was something else, and I want to get to that also after the spoiler warning. I noticed there was kind of an inconsistency in the translation.
Oh, okay. I read it in English.
Well, mainly it was, in a lot of this is in Germany, and there are a lot of German place names that are different in English. I know this because I studied German when I was in high school and college. But like in German, they say Bayern for what in English is called Bavaria, and it might have been, I didn't check, there might have been different translators for different volumes, but in one place it's Bavaria, another place it's Bayern.
That might have helped me with my confusion.
Yeah, it makes it, for if you don't know that Bayern is Bavaria, it would make it more confusing. I think when Schuwald is first introduced, they say he was the vampire of Bayern, and then later he's the vampire of Bavaria.
Okay.
But it's the same place. Although I may also be getting confused because, well, we were discussing this before we started here. Some of these volumes are out of print, and the library at the base where I got the series did not have volume 6. And I thought, well, I'll just buy it online. Well, so these out-of-print volumes, the only used copies you can get are being scalped for outrageous prices. So, like, if you look on Amazon or eBay, you can just find these, like, really expensive copies of them. So I found unauthorized translation online, and I think that translator was using the original German place names. And by the way, I felt like that translator was actually better than the translator of the Viz volumes. Because if I compare some of the other things, I felt like that translator got them a little more natural English. They made a little bit more sense.
That's a skill.
Yeah, it is. I think Viz should hire that guy. But anyway, so before we get to the spoilers, I wanted to ask you, since you're actively making comics yourself as a creator, what did you pick up from Urasawa's work?
Oh, I love Urasawa. I read Monster after Pluto, and it's written quite a bit before Pluto, so it was a little bit surprising to go back and see his work a little bit less polished. But even in Monster, you can see his strengths of, like we talked about, making a connection between the reader and even the smallest characters. He's just an incredibly gifted draftsman, the way that he can draw so many different types of faces in really expressive emotions without becoming unrealistic. I was just blown away by that. And I guess I'm guilty of reading comics and manga and picking up on artistic things rather than written. But the way that his stories flow, the way that your eye goes across the page, it's very natural. You don't feel like you're being led through a story. You just feel like you're experiencing something.
Well, in a lot of places I found with his layouts, I tended to... I mean, there might be a lot of little panels, and some of them are on top of each other, and I would just kind of often take in a page as a whole, especially if there was no dialogue, and rather than looking this panel, I would just kind of look at all of it and kind of take in the situation. You know what I'm saying?
Huh. Yeah, I didn't find that, but I get what you're saying.
Maybe just because I was reading in a hurry, I don't know, but but I just kind of look at the pages as a whole and kind of get these different aspects on the scene.
I sped through the action sequences, like when there's a chase scene or whenever the assassin was involved. He was really scary. And yeah, those pages for me, I would go through, maybe even skipping over panels, but I got the sensation of what he was trying to communicate, this really tense, fast-paced scene.
Yeah. Yeah, and Roberto, well, yeah, he will disappear and then repeatedly appear again when you least expect him. Like, hey, what's Roberto doing here?
So creepy. I love when he's in the counselor's office, when he shows up and pretends to be a patient, and the very slow reveal of what's actually happening, and the doctor trying to get away out of the building. That was so good.
Yeah, well, and it's the way it's first presented, because it's the guy's wife who's coming in and saying he's cheating on me, and it seems like just sort of a thing in the background that you're not supposed to pay attention to.
Right.
And then it becomes important suddenly. Yeah. Okay, well, so now, spoiler warning, this is for people who either don't care about spoilers or have already read Monster. So, yeah, I want to talk about the Red Rose Mansion a little. What we find out gradually through the story is that a lot of people were poisoned there. All these people were brought together in a room and poisoned. And the room where it happened the door was blocked off with plaster. And what's eventually revealed about that is that, Franz Bonaparte, who's actually, his real name is Klaus Poppe. I guess that's how you're supposed to pronounce it. Poppe would be,
okay.
I guess, the German pronunciation. He had a change of heart about his experiments, because he fell in love with the mother of the twins. And so he poisoned everybody who knew about the experiments. But then, so we believe for quite a while that Johann witnessed this. But then it's revealed that it was actually Anna who witnessed this.
Yeah.
And then Klaus Pape told her, forget what you just saw. You're shining jewels and you mustn't become monsters. But then somehow when she tells Johann about this, he somehow latches onto this, and it seems to be part of what sort of twists him, which I had a little trouble buying. Like, why would a secondhand story like that cause him to be like that? I don't know.
He's so intense about it, too. Tell me what happened.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think he's kind of a creepy kid to begin with, maybe. Yeah. But then, the other thing that... So, in about the middle of the series, Johann is walking around town dressed as Anna.
Yep.
And I never... Well, you mentioned earlier on that maybe that was part of the whole name and identity thing, which I guess is the best explanation, because I couldn't think of one. Because... Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I totally get it, but we see him use her identity to get information out of a young man that he's able to flirt with when he dresses as
that
Anna.
Detective. Mm-hmm.
But I can't imagine that was why he initially started doing it, you know? That's such a small detail.
Right,
and
why the detective approached her.
Yeah. Why take I mean, he looks like her. They're twins. When he puts on a wig and girl's clothes, he looks exactly like her. But wouldn't that be dangerous to maybe be recognized by someone who knows her now?
Yeah, well, I guess this was in the Czech Republic, and people there didn't know her yet. Although when she comes to town, then everybody thinks that they recognize her because they've seen him.
Right.
But a little bit, it reminded me of. Now, you said you were born in 1987, so you probably wouldn't know this, but the 80s TV show Dallas. There was a bit where a mysterious blonde woman is reading the newspaper and upset about something, and then eventually it turns out that she is a brunette who we already knew, and then she takes the wig off. But she was only wearing the wig to fool the audience because she never met any other characters in that disguise. So I felt a little bit like that was the case here. It was meant to fool us more than anybody else.
You were being fooled as a reader. It was just to manipulate you.
That was what I felt like. Although the identity thing, it kind of gives it a little bit more justification. But then we see that in the background story, he was dressing as a girl.
Right.
And we kept seeing the scene of a little girl holding the picture book saying "Welcome home," and it turned out that was little Johann in a wig and a dress.
Yeah.
And I
don't know.
Although the very, very, very last chapter, and we've got the spoil warning, so we can talk about this. So Johann, well, I want to get into that too, but Tenma is looking at comatose Johann, and then Johann seems to rise from the bed and say, why did my mother let me go, or let her go instead of me? What was she trying to protect me, or did she mistake my sister for me? And I wondered, did she disguise Johann as a girl to confuse the people who were coming to take one of her kids away?
Oh, maybe. Maybe she thought they would want a boy, and she disguised him.
Yeah. That kind of gives it some justification.
I did read another explanation on the Wikipedia page for the series when I was trying to refresh my memory.
Cliff notes, yeah.
Yes. It seems that Urasawa draws a lot of inspiration from Tezuka, and Johan is partially maybe based on a famous Tezuka character. Oh, it started with an M. If you look it up, you could find it. But
it was from that MW series.
Yeah. And that character occasionally cross-dressed, so it might have just been a detail that came over from the inspiration, but hey, I don't know.
That could be. Yeah, I noticed that too on the Wikipedia page that Urasawa is really inspired by Tezuka, although a lot of manga creators are.
Right.
I think Tenma was also somewhat based on a Tezuka character. The first time I read this, I kind of laughed at how it came out, because Johan gets shot in the head again by someone else, not by Tenma, and then Tenma ends up operating on him again and saving his life again. And the first time I read that, it really struck me funny. And the second time I read it, I realized that it was symbolic of forgiveness.
It's the point of the series. He's a doctor. He's not going to judge anybody's quality of life or what they're going to do after his job is done. But the first time I read it, I was like, have you learned nothing?
But just before that, Nina is saying, I should have forgiven Johan for killing our foster parents. If I had forgiven him, none of this would have happened. And so I felt like what happened with Tenma then, having to operate on him again, was symbolic of the same point that he should have forgiven Johan, and he was forgiving Johan then. And then at the very end, Johan disappears from his hospital bed. And I think it's kind of like, you forgive and you don't know if that's going to prevent anything in the future or not, but maybe it's out of your control.
He might have also died and the bed was vacant, but I also think that Johan escaped. And I don't know, it leads me to believe he hasn't changed if he would run away like that.
Yes. Well, yeah, I think at this point it's pretty hard to change him. A friend of mine who also read this, Japanese friend, said he found it disappointing because the first half was really exciting, and the second half he thought was not exciting. He thought it became too kind of bogged down in all the backstory and the mystery and that. Yeah. I don't know. What's your thought?
I guess so. I was pulled along by the characters that came in, which is true of any series that I read, but you got people like Mr. Grimmer later on, who was great. I was so entwined in any story that he was in that I guess I didn't mind. But yeah, it's much easier to follow for the first half.
I think it depends on your expectations. If you're looking for a conventional thriller, it eventually becomes not that. Maybe early on it is the bit with the Turkish quarter when they're trying to burn it down. That I thought was, then it's a little bit more of a conventional thriller, and there's not a lot of backstory involved yet. We don't know anything about 511 Kinderheim or any of that yet. But yeah, as it goes on, and there's more and more from the past that's being revealed, and as we said, sometimes, maybe the point isn't made strongly enough on some of the points. It could get a little confusing, and if you're not looking for symbolism or deeper meaning, I think you might be disappointed in it. Another thing I wanted to say is that I was expecting and maybe hoping that Nina and Tenma would fall in love.
Yeah, they did push it that way, didn't they?
Or maybe it's sort of what we expect from other stories that we've seen, but it doesn't really happen. I mean, they really like each other. They've been through this bad experience together, but there's never any romantic sense to it.
It's really funny how they're both trying to protect each other from killing by being the first one to kill. I thought that was a good dynamic.
Yes, yeah. They're both like, no, I don't want him to kill, or her to kill him, I want to do it and protect the other from that.
Right.
But
was there a romance for Tenma after Eva?
Not really, no. I don't remember him really falling for anybody. He had some opportunities, but he never did. Huh, and okay. Eva wanted to get back together with him, and he was like, nope, pass, sorry. And then she blames him for ruining her life, where she was the one who originally dumped him.
Right. It's very hard to watch her spiral for so many books. But I liked that in the end she was reformed and allowed to stay through the entire story. That was cool. Mm-hmm. And then her positive relationship with a lot of the other cast members was good.
Yeah, so I think basically I would recommend it, but don't pay $1,000 for one volume on Amazon. I wouldn't do that, but hopefully you can find it in a library, or else, if all else fails, there's scanlation. But
right, it's good. I would recommend Pluto before I would recommend Monster because it's 8 volumes. It's a little bit easier to get into, but Monster is awesome. And if you can, you should definitely read it.
Monster is published in English by Viz, and yes, it is in print now. Thanks to listener Amin Saidun, who enjoyed our review of Urasawa's Pluto and wanted to hear us talk about more Urasawa works. He reminded me that we had this one in the archives. If you're enjoying our comics discussion every week, consider supporting this podcast by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. You can comment on any episode there, or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. That's also the address for submitting your own comics work for possible inclusion on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. Next week, a new episode. Emmett and I continue to look at the work of Jack Kirby that came out after his most well-remembered work at Marvel in the 1960s. We've discussed his various DC titles, and now we're jumping into his return to Marvel in 1975. He started out working on the oldest of the Marvel characters that he had a hand in creating, Captain America. And next week we'll discuss issues 193 and 194, the first 2 issues of his run, in which Captain America and the Falcon go up against the threat of the Mad Bomb. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.